Love it or hate it, tropes and rehashed concepts are here to stay. As a reader and a writer, this can seem depressing. After all, not all of us want to read or write the same ideas repeatedly, and that's valid. In exploring what makes a story popular and what readers look for, it's important to note that none of the elements discussed make a good story on their own. Instead, a good story must come first, with the rest following. Even a mediocre story can sell hundreds of copies if it has these elements, but it will become a household name, be named as a classic, and optioned for a movie deal if it also has something unique to offer. This isn't to say poorly written books haven't been adapted, especially when they included the 3 elements I'm going to list. But the stories that stayed with us through childhood, that we still quote now, married these elements to great storytelling. Harry Potter had its tropes, but it was also well written. Now, am I saying you have to write spicy vampire romances? No. Would they sell more copies than that drama about a war veteran you're writing? Probably. But all stories can benefit from at least one of the elements I list here. The 3 things which can elevate a story are not a replacement for solid writing. Instead, I prefer to think of them as spices or sauces. Cake and cookies taste good on their own, but add icing and sprinkles and it becomes easier to sell them. After all, including any of these elements will simply make your story easier to sell. I'm not trying to discourage anyone, but that's the reality. My story isn't conventional either, and you can still write a unique book. But in my writing, I still try to include things like witty banter, romance, and a sense of humor. To that end, there are 3 elements which will make your story an easier sell. However, before we continue, I'm Riley, and this is Otherworldly Fiction. On this channel, I rant about fantasy books, discuss characters and lore, share my bookish opinion, and offer the occasional writing advice. If any of that sounds like your cup of tea, hit that subscribe button. Posts are on Fridays. You don't have to write fairy porn to make it as an author, but you do need to understand what readers are looking for. When writing your story, whatever its story or genre, consider if these 3 elements can be included. Number 1. Popular tropes. If you've been reading for a while, you've heard what the tropes are. For those who need a primer, the TV Tropes website or Overly Sarcastic Productions Trope Talk series on YouTube can lay them out for you. But simply put, tropes are reoccurring ideas within fiction. The damsel in distress, for example, is a trope, as is the chosen one. For many, tropes can be a point of contention. As a writer myself, I believe they have their place, even if it can seem like lazy writing. But tropes can feel empty if they're used as a replacement for a developed character, or are simply used too much, without being given a twist. The Lord of the Rings, Star Wars, and Harry Potter all use the same tropes, yet all feel distinct from each other, as well as familiar because they still employ their own unique ideas. The use of the Dark Lord trope is nothing new, but Lord of the Rings also has Gollum, and Harry Potter has Snape, so their stories overall remain unique. Tropes that are especially popular right now include enemies to lovers, fated mates, and toucher and die. You might not like these tropes yourself, but they're what many readers are looking for. Other tropes people complain about are the chosen one and the cheating trope. Though their continued prevalence in fiction shows that these tropes can still be used, if executed well. When using something like the chosen one, you simply have to be more creative. After all, Harry Potter is a chosen one story, and nobody complains about the series' use of the trope, especially when the 5th book subverts the trope by pointing out that someone else could have been the chosen one, namely Neville Longbottom. Brandon Sanderson is skilled at subverting tropes. He'll have a Dark Lord, but then it will turn out that the Dark Lord actually served a purpose. He has chosen ones, but they're not always the character you assume. In the Mistborn trilogy alone, you have a chosen one who ends up being more of a mentor, and a mentor character who ends up being the chosen one. Even if you're not writing a fantasy or a romance, there's a good chance your story includes one or more tropes. Being ingrained in our psyche and the stories we consume, they're inescapable. With that in mind, look for any tropes which are in your story, or which would fit in naturally, and then lean into them. Don't rely on the tropes to tell your story, but emphasize and subvert them. Make them pop, but in an original way, and then market your story's use of them. I don't consider the books I'm writing to be perfectly conventional, but they still include tropes like the chosen one, forced proximity, the shared bed, and found family. All tropes which can still be original if used right. I've even used the cheating trope, though I hope what I've done with it is a little different. Identify the tropes in your story and use them. Number 2, draw from the classics. When I call something a classic, I'm not just referring to anything that is or about to go in the public domain, though these certainly count. In this discussion, a classic can be a Jane Austen novel, a fairy tale, or books that are destined to become classics, like Lord of the Rings. Your first instinct will be to write something wholly new, but there's nothing wrong with taking inspiration from the authors who came before. Provided you reuse their ideas in a new way and subvert expectations, you're good to go. It's been said that there are no original ideas left, and this is true to some extent, but the originality comes in how those same ideas are used. Think of your favorite author or series. Chances are he or she drew from a classic. Many fantasy writers cite Tolkien as an inspiration, but some take inspiration from more recent books too, like Twilight or Harry Potter. Obviously, you can't directly copy anything that's still in the public domain. But if you want to write a story about a magic school with your own twist, nobody will stop you. If you purposefully build your story from the DNA of what came before, it will help your marketing. For example, you might market your story as Harry Potter meets Jane Austen, or Twilight meets Lord of the Rings. It's a marketing tactic that's been done to death, but it's used repeatedly for a reason. Such claims make people pause, and if they've loved the books you referenced, you're letting them know you can offer them more of the same. People like something that's the same, but different. You don't want to completely reinvent the wheel. Instead, you want to make your reader feel comfortable, and then surprise them. When someone goes into a fantasy novel, they expect orcs and wizards. You can give them orcs, wizards, and a Dark Lord too, but maybe your wizard is inept, or the orcs are actually the good guys and the elves are their oppressors. Whatever you do, read widely and be open to inspiration. There's no shame in basing your world off of Lord of the Rings, Harry Potter, or Pride and Prejudice, provided you put your own spin on things. Make your story Lord of the Rings with a "but with" at the end. As an aside, be sure to hit like on this video if you're enjoying it so far. Number 3, the original idea. What is your story's gimmick? What makes your society or plot unique from those which came before? Given I just spent the last 2 sections discussing tropes and the books you should draw from, turning around and asking you to be original can seem contrary. But what we're looking at is the central conceit of your story. The Red Queen caught the attention of readers because of its premise. Society is divided into the powerful and the oppressed. and this is determined by the color of their blood. The reds are nobodies, powerless and abused, while the silvers, who have silver blood, are the elites and possess special abilities. Only the protagonist, despite having red blood, also has an ability, upending everything people thought they knew. Stories like the Red Queen have been done to death. We've all seen the oppressive nobility trope and the chosen one before. We've seen love triangles and badass female heroes. However, Red Queen stands out because of its cool concept, the idea of silver blood and the power that it grants people. Twilight, likewise, might seem like just another YA romance novel, though it was a part of popularizing the genre to begin with. However, it has some original ideas. Love it or hate it, vampires sparkle. Not everyone liked the idea, but it's unique. Vampires also attend high school, the sun doesn't burn them, and a select few can survive on animal blood, though it causes their eyes to turn yellow. Meyer's conception of vampires, whether you hate Twilight or not, is refreshing. Though Twilight is a standard YA novel, it stands out because of ideas like this. We've all seen vampires before. After Buffy, True Blood, and the works of Anne Rice, we should be sick of them, but Meyer still managed to reinvent the creatures. When you can marry a cool concept to popular tropes and something that reminds readers of Harry Potter, you'll have a story that's easier to market. Even a story that could become a classic if you remember to treat the ideas as your sauces rather than as the dish. In conclusion, Twilight isn't the best written book in the world, though I personally adore it, but it makes use of all three of these elements, and benefits from their inclusion. It features an enemies to lovers plot, and imprinting, which is another name for the fated mates trope. It draws from the classics, including everything from Jane Austen to Shakespeare, to craft its plotlines and characters, and it takes what we've seen before, teen vampires, and puts a unique spin on them. A Court of Thorns and Roses takes inspiration from Beauty and the Beast, while using the fated mates trope and offering its own original universe. Harry Potter draws from mythology, while including a chosen one and the novel premise of a magic school. And Brandon Sanderson offers a world that is like Lord of the Rings, but with its own unique races, landscapes, and twists, which are complemented by familiar tropes that have been subverted. These three elements, the use of tropes, the inspiration offered by pre-established classics, and the original concept, aren't a replacement for solid storytelling. Instead, they should be used as tools to complement the story you're trying to tell. If your story is the cake, these elements are the icing, the whipping cream, and the sprinkles. Cake is good on its own, but will sell better if covered in creamy goodness. These elements can simply elevate a story that's already good, and make any story, good or brilliant, easier to sell to readers. By mixing them together, you can create a story with a distinct flavor. After all, even if you don't plan to write the next Mistborn novel, your story still needs to stand out. Even McDonald's, questionable as its quality is, has a recognizable flavor. Regardless of if you're writing Game of Thrones or the Zodiac Academy, remembering to combine these three elements can distinguish your story and make it more palatable to readers. How have you used these elements in your own writing? Do you have a favorite trope? Sound off in the comments. And if you enjoyed this video, like and subscribe. Thank you for watching, and happy writing!